There's a moment in every person's life that divides it into before and after. Not a dramatic event, not a crisis or celebration, just a quiet realization. The moment you stop accepting what you've been told and start questioning everything. The moment you begin thinking for yourself. And when that moment comes, nothing is ever the same again. The Stoics understood this transformation intimately. Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, Epictetus, they all experienced this awakening. They all crossed the threshold from borrowed beliefs to examined truth, and they all documented what happens on the other side. Today, I'm going to share what the Stoics discovered about independent thought, about what changes when you finally start thinking for yourself. And I'm warning you now, once you see this, you can't unsee it. Once you cross this threshold, there's no going back. Are you ready? Let's begin. The first thing that changes when you start thinking for yourself is this. You realize how much of your life has been lived on autopilot. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations, "Everything we hear is an opinion, not a fact. Everything we see is a perspective, not the truth." But most people never realize this. They inherit their parents' beliefs about money, relationships, success, happiness. They absorb their culture's values about what matters, what's important, what's worth pursuing. They adopt their friends' opinions about politics, morality, lifestyle, and they never question any of it. They just accept it as truth, as reality, as the way things are. Then one day, something shifts. Maybe it's a crisis. Maybe it's a conversation. Maybe it's just exhaustion from living a life that doesn't feel like yours. And you ask a simple question. Why do I believe this? Not defensively, not rhetorically, but genuinely. Why do I believe that success means this specific career path? Why do I believe that happiness requires these particular circumstances? Why do I believe that this is how relationships should work? And suddenly, you can't find a good answer. You believe it because your parents believed it, or because society says so, or because everyone around you believes it, but you've never actually examined it. You've never tested it against your own experience. You've been living someone else's blueprint, following someone else's map. And the scariest part? You didn't even know it. I experienced this in my mid-20s. I was on track for what everyone told me was success. Good university, corporate job, climbing the ladder, checking all the boxes, and I was miserable. Deeply, profoundly miserable, but I couldn't understand why. I was doing everything right. Then, one day, sitting in a meeting that felt completely meaningless, I asked myself, why am I here? What am I actually pursuing? And I realized I couldn't answer. I was pursuing someone's definition of success, but not mine. I'd never even asked myself what my definition was. That question changed everything. Because once you see that you've been living on autopilot, once you recognize how many of your beliefs and choices aren't actually yours, you can't unknow it. You can't go back to unconscious living. The autopilot is broken, and now you have to learn to fly manually, which is terrifying, but also liberating. The second thing that changes is you lose friends, and this one hurts. Epictetus taught his students, if you wish to be loved, learn to love. But he also understood that independent thought often leads to isolation, because when you start thinking for yourself, you stop fitting into the boxes people created for you. You stop playing the roles they assigned you, and many people can't handle that. Here's what happens. You have friends you've known for years, maybe since childhood. Your relationships are built on shared assumptions, shared beliefs, shared ways of seeing the world. Then you start questioning those assumptions. You start challenging those beliefs. You start seeing the world differently. And suddenly, you're speaking a different language. You're not wrong. They're not wrong. You're just no longer operating from the same foundation. And friendships built on unexamined agreement often can't survive examined disagreement. I watched this happen with my college friend group. We were inseparable for years. Same values, same worldview, same complaints about the system while participating fully in it. Then I started questioning things, really questioning. Not just complaining, but actually examining whether the life we were all pursuing made sense. Whether the things we said we wanted were things we actually wanted or just things we were told to want. My questions made them uncomfortable. They'd deflect, change the subject, make jokes about me becoming weird. Eventually, the friendships faded, not with fights, with distance, because I was no longer the person they'd known. I was no longer confirming their worldview. I was challenging it, and that made me a threat. Seneca wrote about this phenomenon. He observed that people who begin thinking independently often find themselves alone, not because they've become difficult or arrogant, but because independent thought reveals how much of social connection is based on unconscious agreement, on not questioning, on everyone pretending that the emperor's clothes are beautiful. When you start pointing out that the emperor is naked, people don't thank you for your honesty. They exclude you from the party. This is hard, really hard, because humans are social creatures. We need connection. And losing friends, losing community, because you dared to think for yourself, it can make you question whether the thinking is worth it. But here's what the Stoics understood. Friendships based on unconscious agreement aren't real friendships. They're alliances of convenience. Real friendship can handle disagreement, can handle growth, can handle one person changing. If your friends can't handle you thinking for yourself, they weren't actually friends. They were people who liked the version of you that confirmed their beliefs. And that's not friendship. That's mutual validation, which feels nice, but isn't deep. Losing these surface connections makes space for deeper ones, for people who appreciate you for your willingness to question, not despite it, for relationships built on genuine connection rather than shared delusion. But you have to go through the loss first, and that's painful. The third thing that changes is you become uncomfortable everywhere. When you start thinking for yourself, you no longer fit neatly into any tribe. You're too liberal for conservatives and too conservative for liberals, too spiritual for atheists and too rational for the religious. You become a misfit everywhere. Marcus Aurelius understood this isolation. He wrote, "Nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul." He understood that independent thought creates internal refuge because external belonging becomes complicated. Most groups require conformity, not explicitly, but implicitly. You can disagree on small things, but on core beliefs, you have to agree, or pretend to. When you start thinking for yourself, you can't pretend anymore. You see the assumptions underlying every group, and you can't force yourself to nod along when someone says something you've examined and found wanting, and that makes you uncomfortable to be around. I experienced this intensely when I started questioning the relationship between work and worth. I had friends who defined themselves entirely by their careers, and friends who rejected careers entirely. And I was sitting in the middle thinking, both positions seem incomplete. Work isn't inherently meaningful or meaningless. It depends. But neither group wanted nuance. They wanted agreement. So I became uncomfortable in both spaces. Epictetus taught, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." Your discomfort in tribal spaces isn't a problem. It's information. It's telling you that you've outgrown the need for belonging based on blind agreement, that you value truth over comfort. The discomfort of not belonging anywhere is the price of thinking for yourself, and it's worth it. Because belonging based on conformity is a cage. The discomfort of independence is actually freedom. You just have to learn to tolerate it. The fourth change is massive. You stop being afraid of disapproval. This might be the most liberating transformation. Before you start thinking for yourself, disapproval is devastating. Someone criticizes you, judges you, rejects you, and it feels like death, because your sense of self is built on external validation, on people agreeing with you, approving of you, confirming that you're okay. But when you start thinking for yourself, something shifts. You develop an internal locus of evaluation. You start judging yourself by your own standards rather than others' opinions, and disapproval, while still uncomfortable, loses its power. Seneca wrote extensively about this. He observed that most human suffering comes from caring too much about others' opinions. He said, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality. We imagine what people think. We imagine their judgments, and we torture ourselves with these imagined opinions. But when you start thinking for yourself, you realize something profound. Other people's opinions are just that. Opinions, not facts, not truth. Just perspectives based on their values, their experiences, their unexamined assumptions. And if you've examined your choices, if you've thought deeply about your path, if you're living with intention and integrity, why should their uninformed opinion matter more than your informed decision? I remember the first time I made a major decision that I knew people would judge. I left a stable job to pursue something uncertain. Everyone thought I was crazy. Family worried. Friends questioned. Colleagues predicted failure. And the old me would have been crushed by that disapproval. Would have second-guessed everything. Maybe even reversed the decision. But I'd learned to think for myself. I'd examined the choice from every angle. I knew why I was doing it. What I was optimizing for. What I was willing to sacrifice. So when the disapproval came, it rolled off. Not because I was arrogant, but because I trusted my own thinking more than their opinions. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. When you think for yourself, you realize that disapproval is an outside event. It can't hurt you unless you give it power. And why would you give power to the opinions of people who haven't done the thinking you've done? This doesn't mean becoming dismissive or closed to feedback. The Stoics valued wisdom from others, but they distinguished between wisdom and mere opinion, between feedback from people who've examined the question and judgment from people operating on autopilot. When you think for yourself, you become selective about whose opinions you value, and you stop letting the uninformed judgments of others dictate your path. This is freedom, real freedom. Not the absence of judgment, but the presence of internal authority. The fifth change is profound. You see how much propaganda surrounds you, and this one's disturbing. Before you start thinking for yourself, you consume information without really questioning it. News, advertising, social media, cultural narratives. You absorb it all as if it's neutral, as if it's just information. When you start thinking for yourself, you see the manipulation everywhere. Every ad trying to create insecurity to sell a solution. Every news story framed to trigger specific emotions. Every cultural narrative designed to keep you compliant. Epictetus taught his students to examine their impressions, to not accept initial reactions as truth. He said, "It's not things that disturb us, but our interpretation of things. And interpretation is shaped by whoever controls the narrative." The Stoics lived under emperors who used propaganda to maintain power. They understood that those in power shape how people think, shape what people want, shape what people fear, and most people never question it. They just accept the frame, accept the narrative, accept the interpretation they're given. But when you start thinking for yourself, you see the frame. You see who benefits from you believing this. You see what behavior this narrative encourages. You see what questions this story prevents you from asking. I remember when this clicked for me. I was watching an ad that made me feel inadequate about my home. It was subtle, beautiful imagery, aspirational lifestyle. But underneath, the message was clear. Your life isn't good enough. You need this product to be acceptable. And suddenly I saw it everywhere. Every message designed to create dissatisfaction. Every story framed to make me afraid. Every narrative pushing me toward specific behaviors that benefited someone else. It was overwhelming, disturbing, like seeing the Matrix code. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. Seneca warned about this. He understood that most people are enslaved not by chains but by ideas, by beliefs implanted by others, by desires created through manipulation. And freedom begins with seeing the manipulation, with questioning every message, every desire, every fear. Asking, who benefits from me believing this? What behavior does this encourage? Is this actually true, or just a story someone wants me to accept? This makes you skeptical, which people often interpret as cynical. But there's a difference. Cynicism assumes everything is manipulation. Skepticism examines everything to distinguish truth from manipulation. When you think for yourself, you become skeptical. You don't accept narratives at face value. You question sources. You look for agendas. You examine frames. And this changes how you consume information. You're no longer passive. You're active, critical, discerning, which is exhausting, but necessary. Because if you're not thinking for yourself, someone else is thinking for you. And they're probably thinking about their benefit, not yours. The sixth and final change is this. You discover your actual values, and they're probably different from what you thought. Before you start thinking for yourself, your values are inherited. You value what your family valued, what your culture values. You never chose them, you just absorbed them. When you start thinking for yourself, you examine these inherited values, and you discover they're not actually yours. You discover you don't care about things you thought you cared about, and you care deeply about things you dismissed. Marcus Aurelius spent his life examining values. He was emperor, had access to everything. Yet he wrote, "Very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself, in your way of thinking." He discovered that the things people kill themselves pursuing, wealth, status, power, didn't actually matter to him. What mattered was virtue, wisdom, inner peace. But he only discovered this through examination. I went through this in my 30s. I'd been pursuing financial success, thinking that's what mattered. Then I started questioning it. Why do I value this? What would financial success actually give me? And I realized I didn't actually care about money. What I cared about was freedom, time, the ability to work on meaningful projects. And those things didn't require the level of wealth I was pursuing. I'd been climbing a ladder I didn't even want to be on. When you start thinking for yourself, you examine each value. Ask where it came from, whether it actually resonates with you, whether pursuing it has led to fulfillment. And you often discover a gap between the values you think you have and the values you actually have. This discovery is disorienting because it means admitting you've been pursuing the wrong things. But it's also liberating because once you know your actual values, you can align your life with them. Epictetus taught, "First say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do." But you can't know what you would be until you examine who you actually are. When you start thinking for yourself, you discover your actual values, and then you can build a life around them, instead of building someone else's life while calling it yours. So there you have it. 6 things that change when you start thinking for yourself. You realize you've been on autopilot. You lose friends who can't handle your growth. You become uncomfortable in tribal spaces. You stop being afraid of disapproval. You see propaganda everywhere. You discover your actual values. And here's the truth nobody tells you. This process is hard, really hard. Thinking for yourself means leaving the comfort of borrowed certainty, means tolerating the discomfort of not belonging, means facing disapproval from people you care about, means questioning everything you thought you knew. Most people aren't willing to do this. They'd rather stay comfortable, stay accepted, stay certain. Even if that certainty is based on unexamined assumptions, even if that acceptance requires conformity. The Stoics understood this. They knew that most people live what Socrates called the unexamined life. They go through the motions, follow the script, accept what they're told, and never question whether any of it actually serves them. But they also knew that the examined life, while harder, is the only life worth living. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts, not the popularity of your thoughts, not the comfort of your thoughts, the quality." And quality comes from examination, from questioning, from thinking for yourself. So if you're in the middle of this transition right now, if you're starting to question things you never questioned before, if you're feeling the discomfort of not belonging, the pain of losing friends, I want you to know something. You're not broken. You're not difficult. You're waking up. And waking up is uncomfortable, because it means seeing things you'd rather not see, admitting things you'd rather not admit, changing things you'd rather not change. But it's worth it, because the alternative is living someone else's life, following someone else's values, pursuing someone else's definition of success, and arriving at the end having never actually lived as yourself. The Stoics believed that thinking for yourself is not just a skill, it's a responsibility, a duty you owe to yourself, because you only get one life, one chance to figure out what actually matters to you, what actually brings you fulfillment. And you can't figure that out by accepting what others tell you. You can only figure it out by thinking for yourself. So think, question everything, examine your beliefs, challenge your assumptions, test your values. And when people judge you for it, when friends distance themselves, when you find yourself uncomfortable everywhere, remember this: you're not alone. Every person who's ever thought for themselves has walked this path, has felt this discomfort, and they've all said the same thing: it's worth it. Because nothing compares to the freedom of thinking for yourself, of living by your own values, of knowing that your life is actually yours. That's what changes when you start thinking for yourself. Everything.